that's me breaking the ice with that person in terms of opening up, engaging, and allowing that person to know that I'm not just a police officer, but I'm also a human being, which brings that breaking the ice perception. Because just think about it, when you're in a room with people you don't know, people are quiet, people are not engaging. But as soon as that person opens up and starts speaking and talking to you, or everything kind of opens up. And I think that's the dialogue that citizens have to have with the police, and also law enforcement, have to continue to have with the citizens to bridge this gap.
Definitely. Dean, I think that might be Nippy on the other line, and I'm hoping that we can bring her in because she's going to be talking about addiction, which is also a very important issue that I know police have to deal with and things of that nature. But can you drop me a spot as well, and then hopefully that's Nippy on the other line.
Okay, hold on 1 second, y'all. It's Straight Talk with Dean and Mark.
Are you enjoying the smoothest conversation in podcasting? Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. Hi, this is DJ Smooth Jazz, syndicated radio host and co-owner of Portfolio Group LLC, your smooth jazz lifestyle and entertainment group with offices in Durham, North Carolina. Portfolio Group LLC specializes in promoting the lifestyle of smooth jazz listeners with the promotion of smooth jazz events and the distribution of African American owned wines. For more information, portfoliogroupllc.com, or you can swing by my secondary site, djsmoothjazz.com. Now back to Straight Talk with Dean and Mark.
Dr. Lippy Roy, you are on the air. Welcome to Straight Talk with Dean and Mark.
How are you guys? How are you, gentlemen? I'm sorry I called you a little late. I had some clinical issues to deal with.
No problem.
Right.
That's all right.
You're doing fine.
We do not mind you calling in late at all. I'm just glad that I could get you on. We've actually talking to Dr. Al and a longtime friend of mine, Humphrey Truitt, about the concept of community policing. But I also want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you're involved with, because you've dealt with a lot of things with the police officers as well as just in general, because as I was reading your bio, I'm like, you've worked with women that were incarcerated at Rikers Island, and you also spent some time in my home state. I did not realize until I was reading your bio that you had done some of your research and some of your training at the lovely hospital just around the corner from me over at Duke University.
I've had an interesting life so far, yes, indeed. Yeah, I did my internal medicine training at Duke Medical Center, and prior to that I did my med school and my master's in public health at Tulane Medical School, and I also evacuated from a little thing called Hurricane Katrina, went to Houston for 9 months because my med school was flooded, and then came back 9 months later to a very different New Orleans. And then, residency training at Duke. And while I was there, the earthquake in Haiti happened. So during my vacation, I took a week to go down to Port-au-Prince and help some of the earthquake victims there and provide some medical relief. And then after residency in North Carolina, I then moved up to Boston, where I was a primary care doctor to the city's homeless population. And about a year into the job, research came out showing that the leading cause of death amongst Boston's homeless population was drug overdose. And that's how I fell into the field of addiction medicine. So I did that for several years. I also taught at Harvard Medical School and saw patients at Mass General Hospital. And then I got recruited to become the first chief of addiction medicine for New York City jails, including Rikers Island. So I moved to New York about 3 years ago, and so I did that for about a year, but I'm still very involved with the criminal justice system. I'm constantly training judges and talking to lawyers, and in fact, I'm going to Las Vegas in September to give a training on the opioid crisis, what lawyers need to know. So I'm very involved in this area. It's fascinating, challenging, but also very rewarding.
And how do you think that, like I said, we were talking to these two gentlemen about the police force and everything. I was just wondering, how do you think that the police in general and law enforcement in general are doing in terms of understanding addiction and understanding people that are going through addictions and how they are able to deal with those people? Because I imagine even with community policing, which is what they were talking about, oftentimes they may run across these people and not have an understanding of what they are going through, where somebody like you that has had this kind of training would definitely have a better understanding. So how do you think that we're doing in terms of letting our officers know what these folks are going through with their addictions and things of that nature?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And the short answer is police officers and law enforcement in general just don't have sufficient training in this area. And look, this is coming from a doctor who I also never got any training in addiction, very little on pain management, but nothing on addiction. And I'm a physician now, board certified and a quote-unquote expert in addiction medicine, but so we need to really start training healthcare professionals, doctors and nurses, and most certainly we need to really do a considerable training to police officers and as well as really all of law enforcement, including prosecutors and criminal defense lawyers and judges, because a lot of these folks are literally making life and death decisions with people that are struggling with alcohol and opioids and cocaine and all these different substances. And you know, when police arrive, when there's, say, an overdose, police will arrive on the scene, and they'll call that a crime scene, whereas as a doctor, I call that a medical emergency. And I don't blame police officers. They're so accustomed to seeing these quote-unquote same old, you know, lushes and junkies and all these other derogatory terms that are used to describe my patients. And addiction really is a chronic medical disease of the brain. You know, these substances are binding parts of the brain that control decision-making, cravings, emotions. So, you know, I mean, if these substances did the same thing and impaired my brain in the same way, I would also behave in ways that I normally wouldn't. So, yeah, definitely they just need a lot more training, and that way they'll have a better understanding and hopefully more empathy and compassion for the men and women on the streets that they're dealing with.
Dr. Al, I have another question that I want to ask both of you. But, Dr. Al, what are some of your thoughts when you run across folks? Because I know that you were an NYPD homicide officer, so I'm imagining that you probably ran across some folks that were having different kinds of addictions. Did you feel that you had the kind of training that you needed?
Well, in addition to being a homicide detective, I was also a hostage negotiator with NYPD, and as a hostage negotiator, we got a lot more training. I got training with somewhat with addiction and a lot of training dealing with emotionally disturbed persons. However, the average police officer does not have that kind of training, and the other caller is correct. More training is needed. However, law enforcement, we spend 6 months in the academy, and we have periodic training throughout. There are just so many responsibilities for a law enforcement officer. It would be great, which is something that's being proposed here in New York, is to have a doctor assigned to every single precinct so that when these things happen, we can have someone who can respond who is better trained, because, you know, doctors go through years and years and years of training to be able to deal with these situations that an officer, 6 months of training in the academy and a few annual trainings every year cannot do the same type of work that a trained doctor can do. So even with my hostage negotiation training, I deal with emotionally disturbed persons very differently than the average officer would because of the training that I have, which is still in no comparison to what a doctor would have. So, yes, training is a major issue.
Can I just jump in and say that that's such a key point that gentleman made. That additional training, like in hostage negotiation, I mean, these are really key skills that can also be translated to patients that are struggling with addiction, that are volatile, that, you know, de-escalation. These are skills that I also learn as a doctor. But I mean, the whole goal here is for doctors who, like me, who have gaps in our knowledge, to help to get, you know, additional feedback from police officers, and vice versa. Police officers, law enforcement, they also have gaps in their knowledge. And I think the best approach is to work collaboratively so we all have the same, I think, goal and agenda at the end of the day. It's to keep our communities safe, and to do so from our different skill sets and from our different vantage points.
No, that's one thing I was curious about is, I know one of the things you talk about, Dr. Roy, is misconceptions folks have about suicide. And I know one of the misconceptions people have is the whole concept is that in some cases, and I'm thinking that our law enforcement officers may even have cases where it was not a misconception. It was actually a true case. There's this whole concept of folks that say that there are folks that are trying to commit suicide by a police officer, meaning that they are putting themselves in a situation to get the officer to basically shoot them and to take them out of whatever they are going through. And I've heard of incidents like this. I think there was an incident in Durham that might have been 4 or 5 years ago. You might remember that better than I do, Humphrey, but I do remember it being over there near our Bull area.
Right, and I remember that incident as well. And as law enforcement officers, it is a elevated training as far as recognizing that, specifically crisis intervention team training provides opportunity for law enforcement officers to recognize these signs of mental illness, signs of substance use, and also things of that nature. And cognitive behavior intervention allows officers to respond and speak with individuals that are, as the doctor stated, have certain crises, whether it be as substance use as well as mental illness, in ways of speaking to that person and recognizing the impact that their response could have on that particular person's actions. So that elevated training in terms of crisis intervention, cognitive behavior intervention, allows that officer, again, to respond to individuals in a way to which it can lead to a positive outcome in dealing with that individual.
And Dr. Roy, what are some of those misconceptions that you think folks have about suicide? I mean, it's something that definitely happens in our society, and I imagine there are a lot of misconceptions that folks have. What are some of those that you have recognized?
Yeah, so suicide is a very big issue. It's actually a growing health concern and a growing public health concern. There are a lot of causes, but the leading cause of suicide really is depression. And depression is something that's still so undertreated, and mental health in general is so deeply stigmatized. Really, the only issue that's more stigmatized than mental health is addiction, drug addiction. According to the World Health Organization, drug addiction is the most stigmatized social problem, not even a health problem, social problem. So, we really need to, as a society, better understand both drug addiction and mental illness and recognize that these are both illnesses of the brain. And, as soon as we just appreciate that these are health issues, like, for instance, if somebody had liver disease, I don't think cops or doctors would treat them the same way they would somebody who has addiction. And I think the complexity there is because addiction and mental health really directly affect the brain, and the brain is the most complex machine known to humankind. And as a society, we at best understand only 10% of how the brain works. So, I think it's important for us as a society to really recognize that we need to treat people with mental illness and get them the care that they need and deserve. So, say if police officers arrive at a scene where somebody is delusional, they're schizophrenic, they're paranoid. That could be because of drugs. It could be because of their innate mental illness. It could be because of trauma, many different reasons. But it's important to recognize that this is somebody is experiencing, they're unstable right now. They're mentally, psychologically unstable. Let's do what we can to keep them safe and the people around them safe. Let's de-escalate the situation as best we can. These are very specialized skills that I think are important for especially law enforcement to learn and practice constantly.
Absolutely, and I think there's two areas that I know law enforcement officers look at in terms of dealing with people with mental illness and substance use, and that is if that person is harmful to himself or other people. And if that is the case, that person is placed under an involuntary commitment order and transported to the local hospital for evaluation. So I think that response is critical.